The earliest texts say that these entities not only induced people into dream states, but they did that for the purposes of extracting the soul itself from the body. Now, I think this is one of the aspects of the phenomenon that would give us insight into the following point. These are not just horns and hooves. They're not just, okay, the classical definition, okay, that's a demon or that's some kind of creature. What we're dealing with, again, is an entity that is working off of a certain amount of preternatural knowledge. Not just that, but by virtue of incantation or technology, these beings have the evidenced interest in pulling the consciousness out of the body, in manipulating the consciousness or the soul itself. Now, Dr. Carla Turner was one of the, obviously I always talk about her, but she was one of the great proponents of this theory. In her research, she encountered many experiencers who, prior to the actual abduction occurring, something triggered bilocation in them, to the point that literally their body is here, but their consciousness is somewhere out there in the ether. And the actual abduction was not occurring to the body itself, but it was actually occurring to the soul they extracted. All right. Sorry, I had a phone call.
Oh, you good.
And it was having to do with the soul they extracted. Now, there's something troubling going on here, because what we're witnessing in these abduction accounts is that they are actually teaching the soul how to accomplish jobs. Now, the weirdest thing ever, we're looking at different case studies like Betty and Bob Luca, where literally experience is crazy. But Betty Luca was peeled out of her body in the middle of the night. Bob Luca heard a noise in the room. He's thinking, okay, Betty is having a nightmare or something. And he looks over, and to his astonishment, something lifts out of Betty's body and flies out through the window with these beings. Now, Betty Luca was seen in two places at once. Now, even more than Betty Luca, Bob Luca, according to Betty, was on his bed at nighttime, and he was putting his socks on, getting ready for bed. And all of a sudden, this energy filled the room. She blinked, and as soon as she blinked, she sees Bob in two places at once. Now, Betty and Bob Luca's particular case study, it's intriguing to me, and I think it's relevant and germane to our conversation, because they were taking Betty Luca's soul and placing it into a chair, in which this chair itself was tailored to the contour of her consciousness. The consciousness itself was being taught how to fly the craft. Now, the problem is that Betty Luca never flew a craft in body. So they were not training Betty Luca for muscle memory. Neither are they training a lot of these other experiencers for muscle memory. Why? Because I believe, and other of my colleagues believe this too, that in many cases, the abduction is actually preparation for the afterlife. Now, this entire hypothesis is not something new. Again, this phenomenon has been occurring for millennia, but we first interpret it as demonic. Now, here's why. And again, when they're pulling the conscious out of the body, there are almost two fighting sets of memory. Now, in other words, what they're doing is they're looking at these experiencers and they're saying, okay, we're training the soul on symbols, languages, problems. How are you going to solve this when you get to this point? And the problem is, in many accounts, these people literally do not realize that the entire abduction they're experiencing was out of body, even up to the point that they, quote, become physical again. Two dueling natures, even the soul itself, being designed by something and someone and then the body it's inhabiting being designed by something or someone. Now, this is very interesting too, because Dr. Carla Turner, she was working with an experiencer, and this entity told her something that I've been bouncing around for a while. I've even asked some of my mentors about it, but it makes perfect sense if you think of it. They told her that the soul is a different species than the body it inhabits. So what we're dealing with again is a species within a species, which I believe would make perfect sense as to why they have so much knowledge about that unexplored potentiality within all of us. Not just the knowledge, but the ability to at any time press pause on your entire body and pull you out of it, and then do things to your soul or your consciousness. Now, I first heard this mentioned in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 13. Now, there's probably going to get a lot of people, oh my God, he's teaching something Christian. I'm not really teaching anything Christian. As a matter of fact, you see a lot of Christians researchers, they won't even touch this because it's so outside of the peripheral. But the prophet Ezekiel, in one passage, he mentions these beings. They had two different characteristics. Number one, they were called piss prophets. A piss prophet in antiquity was a way to monitor the fertility of women. And more than that, in the book of Ezekiel chapter 13, Yahweh Elohim says, I have all against you those who want the souls of men to make them fly. Now, some researchers would consider this to be the UFO abduction phenomenon that just right there nestled in the fertile soil of Ezekiel chapter 13. Ezekiel chapter 13 is referring to, it's so fascinating, it's referring to a replication process, a self-replication process. And the way the author structures it is that those who should live are dying in order to facilitate those who should die. The way he phrases it is this: those who should die are living, and those who should live are dying. And the purpose, and it's incredible, his concept was that there is a currency to consciousness, in that some of these beings in and of themselves were performing necromantic rites in order to preserve their own existences. Number one, the idea was not just that they took the soul out, but it was that they were feeding on our attributes, literally using the soul as a source of food. Now, in this passage, he goes from literally saying, okay, I have all against you those who put the souls of men to make them fly. He also goes again into the piss prophet concept, where not only were these beings abducting souls, but they were also monitoring the fertility within women, constantly probing and seeing if they were fertile. Now, both of these are behavioral patterns that when you combine them with each other, they're obviously what we've witnessed throughout history in the UFO abduction phenomenon. Now, again, this is interpretation of the Old Testament, but if we apply these behavioral patterns to modernity, you'll witness them throughout these case studies. I'm sorry, I'm not on my game today, dude. Oh, no, you're good. I'm working on it. Good. You know, again, the knowledge of the soul should be disturbing, because in many cases, if you see them, or if you witness an aircraft or some kind of alien ship, we have case studies where they'd actually pulled the soul out of the body and held it with them as they're both looking down at the victim. This is Judy Doherty. She was an experiencer that Collins Elite was working with. And they were talking to her, and she said, she goes, I was just driving down the road one day. She said, I look up, and there's this silver metallic object hovering over my car. She says, I look up, at this disc. She's like, get out. She goes, and it was at that point that I blacked out. And she says, now I'm not looking up at the UFO, the UAP. She said, now I'm inside of it, looking down at my own body. Now, I believe that it's not just the soul that they're after. I think that in order to get to the body, they have to pluck the soul. In other words, it's not just that I'm extracting you from you. I want you. I want to inhabit your body as my own. I was working with a researcher out of New England, and he did a lot of cleansings. He was talking to me about soul hunters and the molters. And he said, he said, you're the only person I've heard talk about this the way you have. And he said, but I got to tell you a story. I said, okay. He says, when I was really young, he said, I would have these fits of sickness. He said, I would go in the ER, they'd give me medication, I'd go home and deal with it. He said, so I was chronically ill. He said, but one night, he said, I'm sitting there, he said, I had the chills and everything. I said, I look in the corner of my room. He said this. He said, I look in the corner of my room. And he said, there was this entity just staring at me. He made no noises. He was just staring at me. He said, that's when I just started feeling myself being peeled out of my body. He said it was a tearing effect. And he said, now, he said, I'm hovering over my body. He said, I'm looking at it. And he said, Nathaniel, he said, the only way I could explain it was I'm looking down at my body. He said, all of a sudden, something crawled into it. And it was that being that was in the corner. Who said, when he crawled into my body began to be animated without me being present in it. He said that was when the entity began to speak a whispering, buzzing language. And then he looked up. And so now you have this kid staring into his own eyes, and something else was inside of him.
That kind of gives him in chills, man.
Right. It's terrifying. But again, in my field, there's a lot of people, okay, well, are they threats to us? Well, maybe a little bit. I think the reason a lot of people don't want to accept that fact was because it puts us as a species in a very compromising position. Because the greatest threat to humanity is the entity that can peel you out of yourself. Danger. They capture danger. No, I'll read this to you. I'll read, okay, so I'm going to read a portion. No, I got some book references for you guys too. Number one, in order to understand Ezekiel 13 in the proper contextual analysis, disembodied souls, nefesh, in Hebrew literature, Gray Aliens and the Harvesting of Souls by Nigel Kerner.
Yeah. I interviewed him last couple years ago. Yeah.
Dude, I would have loved to have met the guy. I heard he was brilliant. But yeah, so that's some reading resources. But again, this idea of peeling the soul out of the body and training ghosts. What is going on here? You know what I mean? Literally to the point that these abductees themselves, like I said, they'll be instructed in many different ways, in many different contexts. And then they'll be told, now you will not remember this. And so what happens is that they get back into their body and there's cognitive dissonance. The soul knows, but the brain doesn't remember. So what's so fascinating about this hypothesis is how much the body is scaffolding to the soul, right? We're seeing without eyes. We're feeling without hands. We're walking without legs. We're thinking with a completely different brain here. And that's why I'm leaning more towards that hypothesis of the soul being made another species than that of the body it inhabits.
Almost like a puppet soul master. Have you ever seen 100 masters?
100%. That through which they would wear the human body as a biological avatar. Now, this would make sense When you look at Ray Fowler's research, and Ray Fowler worked with Betty Bob Luca, Ray Fowler said they are the butterfly form of us. We are the larva form of them. Now, but what that means, though, is that death is just a process, and that they, according to Ray Fowler, they are us. We are them. Now, I think this particular theory, it's structured in such a way that it is us from the future, in a way. Right? They are alien to us, because what's more alien to us than the afterlife? But the question you asked is a very important inquiry. What are they doing to the soul? I've had people reach out to me. One in particular told me that they threw her in a pool of corpses and told her to resurrect them. Again, necromancy. It's through and through in many of these cases. But anyways, yeah. So again, the idea of them plucking the soul out of the body, I think that they're studying the soul in and of itself. What are its capabilities? What, and again, I points me back to the idea that they either altered it, or they're trying to hack it, or it is a food source in a way. Now this gets back to, well, if there's such a threat to us, why wouldn't they kill us all? That's not a good argument. The proper argument would be, why are they leaving all of us alive? Right? It's like you go back into the hypothesis Dr. Kohler Turner had, or we are essentially cattle to them. And being cattle to them, they have to have us replicate in order to keep our species alive. But anyways, getting back to this idea of them plucking the soul from the body, it's not just what they're doing, it's what they're doing to the soul. Now we're getting into, again, Betty and Bob Luca's case study. Betty Luca, when she left her body, they did something to her consciousness to such a degree that when she re-inhabited her body began to manifest skin anomalies. Now, what's important to notice is that they did not take her body in this specific case study, in this specific abduction account. Other times they have, but in this particular case, they took her out of her body, and yet the scoop marks still appeared, which would suggest to us that a lot of these experiencers are having out-of-body abductions. And we're looking at them, collecting the physical data and saying, yeah, they must have scooped something out of your flesh. I would hypothesize to everybody that's going to be listening to this and watching this, that what happens to the soul happens to the skin. And that what we're witnessing are subdermal skin anomalies that are moving from underneath the skin to the surface, because what they're doing is manifesting to the soul and then through the skin. This is not unusual. Other researchers that I'm friends with have also encountered this particular phenomenon. Even in hauntology, a woman reached out to me and told me about how her and her daughter had moved into a malevolently haunted house, and that her daughter she encountered the entity that was in the house, and it began to cause a burning sensation on her arm. Now, here's what's fascinating. Subdermally, underneath the skin, you could see that. I have pictures of it. They sent me photos of it. 3 or 4 different scratches that they did not originate on the skin, through the skin, but they originated underneath the skin to the surface. Moving even further, this soul to skin relationship is also mentioned by Ian Stevenson when he deals with afterlife regression, memory regressions, whatever. Anyways, so what he was doing was he was reaching out to people who claim to have had past lives. And in this research, he's talking to one specific lady. The lady gives him her address, tells him how she died. And she looks at him and he says, okay, how did you die? She's like, well, I was stabbed in the neck. And he looks at her neck, and there is a birthmark right where the mortal wound was in the other body. Now, this is so fascinating because, again, I think that what's happening in the soul is manifesting through the body as skin anomalies, which is also imperative to understand. Here's why. When I was working with that remote viewer, or at least his son told me, he said, my father was taken out of this body. And when they put him back in it, through the skin to the surface of his skin, they had carved religious amulets, not on him, but through him. And these religious amulets were interreligious and cross-cultural. One was a Jewish Star of David, one was the cross, and the other one was an Egyptian hieroglyphic. But it happened from the soul dimension first, and then it moved through the skin. Now, I'm closing with this. We have case study after case study after case study that tells us that not only are they affecting the soul to affect the body, but we have case studies where they've actually threatened people. To call it Turner had an experiencer who, when she was no longer obeying their wishes, they told her in no uncertain terms, if you do not obey us, do you see that body over there? And she looked, and there was a copy of her body on a table. And they said, if you don't obey us, we will take you out of your body. We will kill you. And we'll send that body back in your place. Which means, my dear friends, that the possibility has risen that not every abductee who was returned back made it.